this fall semester for a lot of colleges was sort of marked by disruptions and quarantines, and many students were sent home in the middle of the semester. U Albany just ended the semester earlier, but RPI seems like it was largely spared from the virus. You managed to keep the virus at bay. What are you guys doing differently?
Well, I think it's best not to talk about it from a comparative point of view, but I'm happy to tell you what we've been doing and what we think we've learned, because I can't say that I know all the intricacies of what has been happening at other places. And so I think it's important to say that each institution is unique and has its own unique situation and challenges. So for us, we believe in, and I believe very strongly in, comprehensive planning. So we all shut down pretty much in about the middle of our spring semesters back in March. And we went completely online, as did a number of other universities. Now, we always have used certain online techniques to enhance the residential teaching and learning. And we had a platform that we were able to use to be able to do that. But then we knew that we couldn't predict what the situation would be in the fall. So we felt that we had to have a comprehensive plan. And certainly as things were unfolding in the spring, things were pretty tough, as you know, particularly in New York State, even though upstate had in some ways kind of much less severe situation, but we couldn't assume anything. As well, we have students who come to us from all over the country, as well as from abroad. Now, obviously, the travel from abroad has been greatly curtailed, but we had students who remained with us because they couldn't travel home to where they were from abroad. And so they were here with us through the spring. We also have a summer program. I'm just giving you this by way of context. That's called the Arch Summer. And that's because we restructured our academic calendar within the last 2 years to have our sophomores begin the junior year early. They begin it the summer after the sophomore year. We call that the Arch. And the Arch is meant to be like if you think of the St. Louis Arch, it's kind of a threshold or a pivot point where students go from the early years, the first two, to the upper class years. And the point of that acceleration in the summer after the sophomore year is to give students an accelerated semester, but one that meets all the New York State requirements, of course, to be away for a more extended period of time than the typical summer job. And so they can go away for a pre-professional experience and have the fall semester, which is longer, as well as the winter break to be away, or alternatively, to go in the spring semester and stay through the summer. And so we've been finding that employers really like this. And any number of schools do have co-op programs, but many times it requires students to extend their educational experiences. But for our students, because of how we've structured it, they still graduate within the usual time frame. And I'm telling you this because it plays into what I'm about to talk about to answer your question. So normally the students would then go in the summer, the rising juniors. They would finish what is essentially the first semester of the junior year. And then they would go away either in the fall or the spring semester, as I've described, for more extended internship, research experience, etc., co-op. And then those who would go in the fall would return in the spring, and those who stay in the fall would essentially be finishing the full junior year by the end of the first semester, and then they would go away in the spring. So what that allowed us to do was to come up with a scheme to immediately de-densify the campus by not having all of the class years here. Namely, this fall, we have had the freshmen, the juniors, all of the juniors, except for those who had already lined things up or who couldn't come for various reasons, health or otherwise, and the seniors. The freshmen, because we felt it was important for the freshmen to have the freshman year experience, albeit somewhat different than they might normally have. And for the seniors to be here, to have their senior year, to finish out capstone projects, big things. And then the juniors were here because, frankly, it was more difficult to land something in terms of a typical away experience, as we call it, because of COVID. And so we invited all the juniors to be in the fall so that all of them would go away in the spring with more things lined up. And our Center for Career and Professional Development is lined up to help assist and has done a lot of work with the students. The sophomores are not here, but then because the juniors will be away in the spring, the sophomores will be here in the spring. So now it's freshmen, sophomores, and seniors. So the sophomores will have the opportunity to have one of the regular academic year semesters here, as will have the juniors. But then here's the thing, because of those sophomores would be transitioning into the summer semester anyway. So they will stay here through the summer. So in point of fact, they'll have 2 continuous semesters here. The juniors were on track anyway to have 1 semester here and 1 semester away. So that's kind of, and then we hope that by the time the sophomores go through that arch summer, they'll be on track to either be away in the fall or the spring in the usual way. So that's allowed us, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Staggering the semester seems like a big part of the strategy.
It has been a big part of the strategy. And so it allowed us to naturally flow into being able to de-densify our housing, because it's primarily the freshmen and sophomores who live here, and to de-densify the classes because one whole class was not here. Now, the sophomores will be here in the spring, but we're looking at, so there still is a de-densification strategy, a little more dense than has been in the fall. But as far as the class lineup, similarly, we won't have the class load. So the real answer to your question is that our biggest takeaway is that a comprehensive plan, comprehensive planning that culminates in a comprehensive plan is so very important, and that has helped us greatly. Now, embedded in that plan, and I'm sure Richie may have told you some of this, but embedded in that plan are certain key factors that I would highlight. First of all, we always felt a testing protocol was very important. And so we developed something called T cubed, that means T to the power 3, yeah. SQI, which stands for testing, tracing, tracking, surveillance, quarantine, and isolation. So it's a mouthful. So, we like little acronym type things. And so we call it T cubed SQI. Actually, I came up with the name, I liked it. But it seems to have taken. So the bedrock of it, of course, is the ability to test. We've done automated testing. We can do a large number of tests per week, on the order of 7,000 per week, which is it's a huge number per day. We don't typically test on the weekends unless there's a reason, but we can do that. And so we're talking upwards of 1,400 tests a day. We test all of our students twice a week. That's the basic protocol. Any student who has access to the campus is tested twice a week. Our faculty and staff are also tested every week, and whether they're tested 1 or 2 times a week, depending upon how much access they have, how much contact with students, and just generally the nature of their jobs. We also still have a number of our employees who are working remotely. The philosophy being that if they can work remotely, they should work remotely. And so we do this testing, and the testing rests on what I call the 3-legged stool. We're able to do PCR-based, that's the most sensitive kind of testing, pool testing, here at Rensselaer. We set up capability. It came out of our, the capabilities we have built into our Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies, although in fact, the actual testing facility is off the main campus. It's over in the tech park. The second leg of the stool and that's kind of surveillance testing. And the second leg of the stool is antigen-based diagnostic or confirmatory testing. And so that if a signal shows up, we can involve, but we have to have it confirmed with point of care testing, and our health director does that here. And then the third leg of the stool is another PCR-based approach, that the PCR-based, again, diagnostic and confirmatory testing through the Broad Institute in Cambridge. And so PCR-based pool testing here, antigen diagnostic and confirmatory testing here, and PCR-based diagnostic and confirmatory testing with 24-hour turnaround through the Broad Institute. And those latter two are the ones that if there's a positive initial signal, those two confirm, and that goes to the health department, and we follow what they say, of course.
Can I ask you a question? I know at the beginning of the semester, one challenge that a lot of college administrators had was either they didn't yet have the capability of testing, or they had the science or the capability or the lab, but there were parts that were back ordered because of the demand. How were you guys able to get, to what extent were you able to get testing up and running before students returned?
A couple of things. First, we already had on order a number of the antigen tests from the Quidel system, and they delivered on that. We already had the machines. That's been one of the rate limiting steps. We had the Sophia machine. And so by the time our students started to arrive in the fall, we already had thousands of those tests. We were able to have those. The second piece is that because of our own capability, we were, and where people do this PCR type reaction, it's called a polymerase chain reaction. Our faculty, some of the faculty in the biotech center, do those reactions for their own research, not on COVID, and so we were able to get an under emergency use authorization to do it for pool tests. And so we were able to just stand it up, and people knew how to get and or make the reagents that are needed. And so we did that. And when I talked about comprehensive planning, it means with the lead time. And so I'm the type, and we're the type where we didn't want to have to depend on being able to go to the outside. And we didn't want as well to be a burden to the local healthcare system, where you have residents here who need COVID tests. And that as well, you have other schools here who might not be able to do what we did. And so if we could offload and take care of our students, faculty, and staff, and by the way, we don't just test students, we test, as I said, faculty and staff as well, then we felt that we were not burdening our own community. And we wanted to be a good neighbor, particularly since maybe as much as, but more than many of the universities here in the capital region, we have a truly national and international population of students. And so we wanted to be able to do that. The other piece is, in addition, and I'll come back to dedensification, we actually started the semester with a 2-week in-place quarantine. And we just decided to do that. You know, New York State had a quarantine requirement anyway for people traveling outside of certain areas. But rather than saying, okay, this one is 2 weeks and that one is not, and this one, we tested everybody the day they walked in the door. And we tested all our faculty and staff the day they had access to campus. But we tested every student the day they walked in the door. And we had them come a week early. So that's 1 week. So they had to stay in quarantine. And that's irrespective of what their test showed. We just had them stay in place. And then the first week of classes was also online. So effectively, we kept everybody in place for 2 weeks before we started the in-person teaching. So that was a key piece. And then we decided we would end the in-person part of the semester at the Thanksgiving break. It didn't make sense. It's interesting that that's what the governor's saying, but that's built, if you look at our plan online, that's the way it's been the whole time. That we didn't feel it made sense to have students travel away, come back for 2 weeks, and then go back again. And so when we say ending in-person teaching, that's what will happen as of Friday, November 20th. And then the balance of the semester will be online, exams, people finishing up. And we've, the faculty are accelerating any in-person projects that need to be done, etc. So all of that was part of our plan from the beginning, and with no breaks other than, in between. And so that's what we've done. And then we actually have faculty who had developed a very sophisticated epidemiological model. And particular professor named Malik Magdan Ishmael. And he developed a kind of a two models, but they're kind of two phases of similar epidemiological modeling, where one can look at actually projections of how many infected students we would have over time if you tested a certain amount, if whether people wore masks or not, how many came in infected, et cetera, et cetera. And as well as looking at likely new infections over a 14-day period. And so we use that to determine the testing frequency and how we would do it to keep the infection rate lower than 1%. And as well as looking at with the second type of model that was built out of the same capability, the spread of the virus in the community. And so we've shared that, and it's actually online now, but early on it had been shared with CDPHP so that they could have a sense of what might be happening.
Can we backtrack for 1 second? After those first 2 weeks when every student was tested and quarantined for 14 days,
right.
Did you do anything after that to limit or restrict their movement or to go out into the community, especially, at that point, there seemed to be a fair number of cases in the community?
Well, what we've said is the following. Presumably the students who came back wanted to be here. And the only way they could have campus access and to attend classes in person was to show up for their tests. And if they don't, their access actually is immediately cut off. Secondly, we've given people advice to not do gatherings greater than 10 people. The only time they're more than 10 is in a class, but the class is in a classroom where they're really spread out. We mark the seats and where there's a lot of enhanced ventilation, and we put special filters in our ventilation system. And all of that is part of it. And when students come anywhere on campus, they have to wear a mask. They have to, we give them the masks, and we give them shields, face shields, depending upon what they're doing. And then otherwise, our student union is open, but they can't come together in groups of more than 10. And when they do come together, they have to have the 6 feet of separation.
Did you have to police that a lot? I know, enforcement has been tough for a lot of.
Well, we've done a little more policing off the campus. Our student life. We have an off-campus commons, which means we have off-campus deans, and we've assigned some of our other deans into that space. And so particularly on the weekends, we try to keep track. And we're not trying to be the police per se, but we will, if we discover people are gathering too much, break it up. And then we revised our student code of conduct as well as part of our planning. And the students signed on to adhering to our protocols. And if they don't, then they could either have campus access cut off, or if they've really been, if they go through a judicial process, they could be suspended. And
then there was the app that sort of, students could voluntarily log their activity, right? How did that work?
Well, we have what's called a dial. That's the daily interactions and activities log. And students keep track about their activities and where they go on a daily basis. Here's the thing. We don't have that log. They have it. The reason we expect compliance, but the reason we want them to have it is so that if any student tests positive, that we have a jump start on contact tracing. They also log every day how they feel, any symptoms and so on. And again, that helps Dr. Lawrence, our health director, to understand, you know, whether they're, how symptomatic they may be, you know, whether he needs to recommend that a student may need to come in for testing, even if the student's been on the regular schedule, and as well as recommending any hospitalization. And so those two things, this health log and the daily you know, interactions and activities logs. But we also have the ability to monitor wireless access points on the campus. And by monitoring these wireless access points, we get congestion data to see if there are pinch points on the campus. And again, that plays into the epidemiological model. So if you have pinch points, somebody has COVID, let's say, you could say if someone has COVID, what's the likelihood, depending on whether people are wearing masks or not, of the infection rate jumping up? This is huge. It's also very expensive, but it's huge. And then when I talked about de-densifying the campus, we de-densified the housing, we de-densified the classrooms with class size. We did a lot of some physical work with the ventilation, the special filters, etc. We de-densified the dining, the on-campus dining, where students have assigned times to eat so that we can have them spread out. And whereas before, you know, there were unlimited seconds and so on, we don't allow that right now. And so it's been quite something. And then with the health and safety protocols, again, limiting the size of gatherings, mask wearing at all times, social distancing, and there's campus access that we will cut off if a student misses his or her test, or if they participate in some gathering that's larger. And any student who lives in a situation that doesn't meet the density standards has to take their classes online. And so people have to be pretty serious. But let me say this, our students are very, you know, they've been amazing. We've had our, you know, some cases, obviously, but the degree of compliance and the care that these young people have taken, I'm very proud of them, actually. You know, they're very serious, and you know, they are young people. So every now and then somebody can make a mistake or do something, but these folks have been really amazing. Secondly, our faculty have been amazing. You know, they've stepped up. They teach these classes. We have faculty wearing masks and face shields. In some classes, the students are wearing masks and face shields. The students have to disinfect or sanitize the spaces. We give them wipes as they come into class. They do that. And so we just felt that this was a whole cultural thing. And part of the initial 2 weeks, we used that period to educate people, educate everybody, that incoming 2 weeks in place, to be able to have people become habituated to what we were doing.
Can we briefly talk about the numbers? How many tests have been conducted since the start of the semester? And I think up until recently, it was 8 cases, right? And I assume they were isolated cases, not linked to...
we may be up to about 12 cases or so now. Don't pin me down, I have to get the latest data, but it's no more than 12 or 13, and that's out of probably upwards of 80,000 tests. As of yesterday, we had done over, it's probably in the high 70s. We had done over 76,000 tests. I'm trying to look up the data for you, but
which is like I think an infection rate of less than 0.5%, right?
Yeah, way less. Yeah. And so we, you know, we're going to stick with it. You know, it's, as you get closer, it gets harder. You know, people kind of, you know, there's a fatigue that sets in, but you know, we say, and we keep messaging with the students as well as others. And our student life, staff, they really stay in touch with the students. And for those students who are in our isolation or quarantine, they are checked in on several times a day. We don't just put them someplace and leave them. And then we feed them, of course. You know, we have a drop
Nice.
and go system. But with the drop and go, believe it or not, they have an app where they have some choices and they can ask for something from a menu. And we'll prepare that. And then we do that. We also test any contractors who work here. We test Sodexo employees, and we test anybody who's going to spend any time on the campus and
Was
in the
there
proximity of
was there
others.
any sort of trial and error? Now, you know, we're seeing cases surge. We're back up to, I think, May numbers in the capital region. Are you going to do anything differently in the spring because
Yeah, I
of
can tell you a little bit about that, but let me answer the first part of your question this way. You know, of course, when we started, you know, our throughput, you know, how many we could process, you know, in a day or at a time was less. But now, you know, we're clicking along. We've had as many as 10 or 15 lines going
Wow.
because we train students how to do the swabbing. And then
Oh,
insert things into the vials, and then we take the vials and take them off to our test lab, or, you know, if we're doing it a quick test, to the machine we have, or we send them to Broad. So it takes a huge effort, a plan, logistics, and cooperation. And that's why I was giving praise to our students, our faculty, and our staff. And, you know, as you know, we didn't have fall athletics. And so a number of our coaches have worked at our testing tent to, you know, help with the logistics and so forth. And so everybody's pitched in. This has been a community effort. And I think because we started fast and early, and then we try to live it out.
what have you learned though? So, we knew so little about the virus at the start of the semester, and now we know a lot more.
Well, I think what happens is we've learned that it reinforces, I'll put it that way, that you have to have the testing, but you have to have the comprehensive plan around the testing. You know, the testing is a bedrock, but then what do you do? How often do you test? Whom do you test? How do you use it to make decisions about what you do, how you organize? How we trained our own contact tracers. You know, we did this all with the, you know, we were always been working with and in touch with the Rensselaer County Health Department. But we did that, again, to offload the burden. And so we did that early on. We trained contact tracers. And so I think it takes the culture of having people adhere to health and safety protocols, the mask wearing, the social distancing, you know, the sanitation, that both the sanitation the university does and the hygiene we expect our students, faculty, and staff to observe. And so in a way, it's just been a reinforcement of where we started. Rachel, it's, but you have to keep at it. You know, it's relentless. And it does take the cooperation of everybody. That's what we've really learned.
Circling back to my other question, you know,
Sure.
given that we're at record rates now, are you going to shift it all or adapt? How would you adapt?
Sure. So in the spring, so we'll have 2 months we're going to step back and say, what lessons learned, you know, have we made? You know, what do we need to do differently or think about differently, particularly with the sophomores coming who haven't been here. And we're going to start a little bit later. We're going to start after the Martin Luther King holiday, but let me tell you what that really means. We won't be starting in-person classes till at least February the 1st.
Oh.
Because the students will be back around the 19th, 18th or 19th. But we're going to test them all coming in. But we're going to start the first 2 weeks online of classes. And then we'll shift into in person with all the protocols and any enhancements or refinements to them that we need to make. And then we won't have a spring break. And then so we can end on time. So starting later means that normally it'd be shorter, but we're going to work through spring break. But we're also looking at what campus activities do we need to perhaps beef up in a way, because to ask people to cooperate and adhere to the protocols, you know, they've got to have outlets, but mainly campus-based outlets. And so we've been pretty stringent in terms of campus access, no visitors, etc. And we'll probably keep that up. But I have asked our student life professionals to look at the campus-based activities and also how we keep our athletes in shape, whether we compete or not. And so that's, you know, and then a big factor, and you mentioned lessons learned. A big factor, I'll tell you, Rachel, is making sure we look out for the mental health of our students. This is a very stressful time for everybody, and that we look out for the mental health of our employees, our faculty and staff. So we've beefed that up as well. We were fortunate to have hired a new director of our counseling center, who is a psychiatrist. And so it's very helpful to have her with us. But we also have an employee assistance program for our faculty and staff. And so we've beefed up what we're doing in that arena. And that's both something we did, but we learned that we need to do even more of that. And this other is that this issue of really culture rating and being in touch with our off-campus students, because the vast majority of the cases we've had have come from off-campus students, even though we haven't had a lot of problems with huge events and things and bad behaviors, but there have been, you know, most of the cases have come there. But in a certain sense, because they're off campus, they're inherently more exposed. Right. Whereas the students who live on the campus, it's not that they never leave the campus, but, you know, on average, they can just stay here because we feed them, we house them, we teach them, you know, we have activities and so on.
Are off-campus students allowed on campus, or they have to be online only?
Off-campus students, there are two essential requirements. One, they are tested as frequently as the on-campus students. They're tested at least twice a week. And so to have campus access, even for social recreational things, they have to meet their testing schedule. If they don't, the access is cut off. The other is that we prefer that they be no more densely packed than the students on the campus. And if they live in a situation where they are, then their learning tends to be remote. So that's, and so when I say a comprehensive plan, you do have to test and test with the right frequency, but you have to have all these other factors that come together to make the whole thing work. You can't just pick out one thing. And you have to test with a certain frequency. I don't think you can get away with students with testing less than every 2 weeks. And if they're doing a lot of things, or if they're, you know, traveling away and coming back to the campus, then you have to test them more frequently. But you have to have the isolation and quarantine set up and to know what your capacity is. We also have triggers that say if in fact we reach a certain limit, you know, there's a state limit about 100 cases over a certain 2-week period, but we actually have a more stringent limit that's a little small, that's smaller than that, smaller number of students. And if we reach trigger, you know, we trip our trigger, then we'll shut down anyway for at least.
What is the trigger for you? Do you know it offhand? I can look it up if you.
It's basically 30 cases
Got it.
at one time over
Got
a
it.
certain period. And so we'll automatically shut down for 2 weeks. And then if it goes above or starts to approach our isolation capacity, then we'll just shut down for the semester. But to this point, we haven't done that.
How does the algorithm fit into that, to planning? How can people practically use it? I know you've made it available in the public domain.
Well, it can allow you to it depends on your starting point. So it can allow you to say, well, if you have somebody who gets infected, and if you have gatherings of this size, without the 6 feet separation, if 50% of the people wear masks and 50% don't, or 30% wear masks and 70% don't, what is the spread, the likely spread of the infection rate? It allows you to look at things like these congestion points to say, well, if you have someone who's infected, but people tend to congregate or get pushed together at this point on the campus, and it's for longer than X period of time, then what's the predicted infection rate? So it allows you to manage the campus, and then it says, how often do you have to test to be able to get quick detection, and assuming that you can immediately isolate and or quarantine people? How does that affect your infection rate? So it's not just a tool that allows you to be post facto, it allows you to actually be predictive. And because of that, it allows you to use it as part of your operational planning and how you adjust things as you go. And that's why it's important.
Yeah.
So when I say comprehensive, I mean just that. If we tested without having some visibility about what it would mean with infection rates, or we didn't understand how it played into things like mask wearing or
Right.
density on the campus, then all we're doing is just catching the cases as we go. But with the modeling, it also allows us to intervene and to take steps and to make judgments about how effective those steps are. So that's where we are.
Excellent. All right, anything else? Any other advice, takeaways from this past semester?
Well, mine is what we tell our students and faculty and staff, just to care about each other, look out for each other, and adhere to the health and safety protocols, not just while you're on the campus, but while you're off the campus, and especially as our students travel home. Now, when they leave, we will be testing everyone on the way out. That was also always in the plan. And then we're going to have them leave within anywhere from 24 to, well, certainly within 72 hours, but we're targeting 24 to 48 hours so that we're not sending people out knowingly infected. Now, unfortunately, we can't govern what happens depending on their mode of travel and where they may stop on the way. But I think we can give people assurance that we will not send people out knowingly infected. We also have made arrangements to get our students to their primary point of departure, meaning to the airport or train, if someone isn't coming for them. We're going to be running shuttles, de-densified, to get students there so that they don't have to use other means that might expose them, because they'll have exposure anyway if they're flying or taking trains, etc. We really care about these young people. Now, students don't love it when you have all of these things, but I think our students understand it, and in fact, some of them appreciate it, because there's some students who didn't come because of their own vulnerabilities, health vulnerabilities, or because of their own concerns, and we understand that. And so, what we've also said, we're going to do our darndest to make this place as safe as it can be.
It's not cheap, right? It sounds,
It's
running an
very
elaborate
expensive.
plan
Yeah.
like this.
It's
What
very
can you give
expensive.
us like a range? Like what does it cost to run an operation like this? From the shuttles to the testing to the apps.
Several tens of millions of dollars.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. How is tuition gonna go up? Like how is?
No, I mean, we did our normal tuition increase. We haven't made any determination for next year, but whenever we've increased the tuition, we also have, in addition to how we adjust financial aid overall, we have an emergency fund, and
Right.
we always add to it so that if a family has an economic hardship beyond what we know about, we ask them to please let us know so that we can make adjustments and use this emergency fund to help them out. That's how we do it.
Gotcha.
And so that some people say freeze the tuition, don't do this, but our piece is let's keep it moderated, but then let's be able to take care of people who have need. But then we've made our own cuts. We actually right now don't have travel. We don't have visitors. We have some people we've furloughed. The leadership team took a pay cut months ago.
Yeah.
We've implemented other pay cuts, and we've cut back on any non-essential activities. And so all of that has helped us to have enough savings to substantially cover these costs. So it's not easy. It's a sacrifice,
and it might be a little too soon to think about, but are you, considering how RPI plans ahead, are you thinking about when the vaccine comes out, how you would incorporate that into the larger public health plan?
Well, I think, we'll all be glad, but we also believe that, the day there's an approval, whether it's likely to come first through an emergency use authorization, which means it's a very targeted use, perhaps for healthcare workers and people who are the most vulnerable, or people, that kind of thing. Secondly, we don't know what the logistics will be in terms of how it really gets delivered around the country. Now, we're preparing for it if there's special storage capabilities. So here's the thing. We have flu clinics here for the flu vaccine. In fact, we are moving, just like with other vaccinations, to require people to take them unless there's a reason they can't. So we don't know if we'll be able to have our own supply, which allows us to have a COVID vaccination clinic, which is what we would like to do, or if we have to have people go and get it somewhere else. But we're gearing up either way to fold that into our planning for how we onboard students, say in the fall, because that's when it's most likely to have an effect. We think it will have no effect for our spring semester,
Right.
Because just gearing up, getting the manufacturing done, and then getting it distributed. And it's apt to go to major metropolitan areas first. And so we have to, anticipate that. So that's a long-winded way of saying that we plan to keep the kind of structure we have, because we don't see that the relief will be in the second semester. We're hoping that by the time we get to the summer or fall, that we'll be able to see some effect. And I think that's the greatest danger for us overall as a country, that people feel that the advent of a vaccine means it's nirvana, and people do get weary.
Yeah.
And if they give up the health and safety protocols, it would be really tragic to see a run-up in cases beyond what we're already experiencing.
I mean, are you worried about the surge in cases? I mean, I think we've topped our record number for infections in one day in this community. Is this something that you're concerned about?
I am concerned about it, but I always say that if I'm concerned, I have to try to do something about it as a leader. Mm-hmm. And so the first part of that, doing something about it as a leader, is to try to protect the community I'm responsible for directly as much as I can. The second thing I have to try to do as a leader is to operate our community in a way that can be as protective of the larger community as possible. And the third is if we have tools and capabilities that we can share with the larger community, the epidemiological modeling being one, but if there are other capabilities we're able to develop that we can legally share, we will do that. And
All right.
Because, you know, we're in a unique position of being a technological university.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have built up capabilities in certain areas, we were able to move fast. And that's helped us greatly. And so if we can begin to share some of those capabilities with our larger community, we will do that.
That would benefit everyone, including RPI students, of course, having.
Of course.
Yeah, more people having those tools.
I mean, I always believe in the win-win. And
yeah.
as I tell people, I'm not the type to just rub the worry beads.
Yeah.
You know, I have to try to, I have to try to do something about it. You know, I was chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission before I came here. It was a long time ago now. And so that meant that I had the responsibility for the safe operations and public health and safety and defense, you know, in the use of a sensitive technology, you know, nuclear. And the whole point is to have what people call, we refer to as defense in depth, that there are no absolutes, but you try to put multiple barriers to something untoward happening. And then you share as much as you can in nuclear because it links to other things. You have to be careful of what can be shared, but you try to share at least, you know, approaches and procedures that can help other entities, including other countries. So I was actually one who promulgated the idea of forming an International Nuclear Regulators Association.
Wow.
To bring the heads of the regulatory bodies of 8 major nuclear countries together to, as much as possible within our own sovereignty, to share best practices. And so it initially brought together the head regulators of Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Spain, Sweden, the UK, and the US. And that was formed in 1997. While I was still there, I was chairman of the group initially for 2 years. Guess what? The group still exists. So I'm really proud of that. The point, though, is it's less about that and more about the fact of, in an area that can affect your community, you try to do things that can help the community. And
how does this challenge rank up against, you know, your past roles in protecting the public's health?
Well, this one's a big one.
Yeah.
You know, it's a global and it's affected every country. But it also depends a lot on, as much on cooperation as opposed to legally enforced compliance.
Right.
And so that makes it a greater challenge. And in addition, it has such an effect on our economy. But the economy is not going to totally come back unless we get this under control. And so that's where I think the vaccines, the therapeutics, but the continued vigilance with the health and safety protocols and testing. We still need more widespread testing, and we're going to need it for a while.